כי מציון תצא תורה, ודבר אדוני מירושלים. כי מציון תצא תורה, ודבר ים מירושלים. ברוך שנתן תורה לעמו, ישראל בקדושתו. ברוך שנתן תורה לעמו, ישראל בקדושתו. היה לה 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 לה, היה לה 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 לה, היה לה 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 לה.
Amen.
And as we approach the study of Torah, we sing the blessing before the reading and study of Torah. Baruch hu et Yamorach, Baruch Yamorach le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu im kol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah haya noten haTorah. Amen.
All right, so last week, I'm just going to bring us up to speed. Last week was the last plague, the slaughter of the firstborn of the Egyptians. And the Hebrews and a mixed multitude then left, left Egypt together. And I was reading last night just about last week's Parsha again, and I found this very, I want to say sweet, but sweet isn't really the right word, powerful explanation or discussion about the fact that leaving, the story of us leaving, even when we were told to, the Hebrews were told to go to their Egyptian neighbors and ask for essentially reparations. They were supposed to get, so then we're in the desert and you wonder, where do they get all this gold and all these beautiful cloths and all these beautiful things to create the Mishkan and to create the plates for the priests and all these things? It's because they went to their Egyptian neighbors and they asked for reparations. They obviously didn't call it reparations, but we'll call it reparations. This was after, as they're crying out because they've all lost their firstborn son, so probably terrified that more slaughter is yet to come. But one of the commentators that I really like, Avraham Burg, who's an Israeli, he was in the Israeli Knesset for a long time. He refers to this this part when the Hebrews have to do something miraculous, right? Before the slaughter of the firstborn, they're told to kill the sacred animal of Egypt and put the blood on its doorposts so that the angel of death doesn't come into their home and kill them. And now, it's kind of bizarre because, of course, God can distinguish in all sorts of ways between different peoples, but apparently once, violence is unleashed in such a massive way. Does this sound familiar?
Yeah.
Everyone gets wrapped up, and the angel of death doesn't distinguish. But so the Hebrews take this wild act of faith, and they kill this sacred animal, and knowing that if this doesn't happen, if this angel of death doesn't come, and if they don't get freed, there's gonna be some serious consequences. And then they leave. They walk out. And he talks about this as an act to say that we can have transformative revolution without violence. Now, that's of course putting aside the violence enacted by God, right? But that the Hebrews did not go into the Egyptian homes and steal or kill or engage in any violent acts. They asked for some reparations in a time of trauma, and then they walked out of the land. And so now in this parsha, Beshalach, we're at the place where they're now being guided by God and Moses to continue on their journey. And God sends them on this circuitous route. And they end up, because God's worried they're going to go back. God's worried that when they see war and they see trauma, that they're going to think life is easier in Egypt and they're going to want to go back. And in this parsha, you'll see them actually say that. And so then they get to the Sea of Reeds in this parsha, and the sea splits. And so that's where we are, and that's what we'll start to read. Because I want to make sure that we end in time to do Tu B'Shvat at around 11:30. It will be a shortened Torah study this week, which is too bad because we always have such rich conversations. But you can pick up the parsha and continue to read it and explore it on your own or with others during the week. So, Austin, let's begin. So if somebody will read the English. Anybody? Somebody online want to unmute?
I can do it, Rebecca. Okay. Now when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, although it was nearer, for God said, the people may have a change of heart when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people round about by way of the wilderness at the Sea of Reeds. Now the Israelites went up armed out of the land of Egypt. And Moses took with him the bones of Joseph, who had exacted an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will be sure to take notice of you. Then you shall carry up my bones from here with you. They set out from Sukkoth and encamped at Etham at the edge of the wilderness. Is that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh? Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh went before them in a pillar of cloud by day to guide them along the way, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light, that they might travel day and night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from the people.
I'm just trying to imagine an experience where you have a sense that there's always a divine presence with you and protecting you. Right? Like what an amazingly exquisite concept. It's hard to really imagine, right? I mean, maybe sometimes we have a taste of it. We can feel God's, some divine hand in our life or in our presence or in a moment. But here is this divine cloud, if you will, protecting them during the day and night, with them by day and night. Yeah, continue.
Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. Before Baal-zephon, you shall encamp facing it by the sea. Pharaoh will say of the Israelites, they are astray in the land. The wilderness has closed in on them. Then I will stiffen Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, that I may gain glory through Pharaoh and all his host. And the Egyptians shall know that I am Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. And they did so.
Okay, so hold on one second. Hang on a second, Rebecca. So I just want to open it up for a moment to just ask ourselves, what is going on here? God's like, I'm gonna now strengthen Pharaoh's heart so that they'll pursue you all. And it says, like, so that they'll know how powerful I am. Right? I mean, this is crazy.
Yep.
They've just slaughtered the sacred animal. They've just seen the firstborn dead. They're fleeing for their lives. Oh, sorry. I'm going to slow you down a little bit and make them pursue you, just so you're really shaking in your boots.
Can you lower this text to where you're reading the paragraph before? Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
All the way.
There we go.
Thank you. Okay.
So there's some argument, and we talked about this last time, that this question about I will stiffen Pharaoh's heart. It says Hidzakti. So that means I will strengthen the heart of Pharaoh. And some of the commentators say, well, Pharaoh's heart was already strengthened. We read earlier how Pharaoh would strengthen his own heart. And there's a point at which when your heart becomes so closed to the humanity of the other that there's no way that divine access can enter in. There's no possibility of transformation. And so it's really like Pharaoh's heart was just so closed that there was no God presence in Pharaoh's heart anymore. But, I mean, we could twist the meaning around, but it does say, I will stiffen Pharaoh's heart, he will pursue them, so I may gain glory. And this is, we've talked many times about like the development of God's consciousness.
Yeah.
Right? And here's a time, it seems to me, where God's consciousness is not particularly developed. Yeah, Roger.
Well, this is...
And just talk a little aloud.
That's sort of a rationalist interpretation. So we might interpret the killing of the firstborn and the marking of the doorposts as basically a terror operation, a special forces operation that the Jews might have done, and then they did the shakedown. But at the same time, Pharaoh's army might have been thinking strategically. If we get them out in an open space, we have the sort of technological and military advantage. So that would explain the later delay.
Did you all hear that? Kind of. Okay, I'm going to try to repeat it. Correct me if I'm not repeating well. So Roger's bringing in a rationalist interpretation, which he does, and I love it. And he's saying, well, we could say that he's saying perhaps the Hebrews actually enacted the killing of the firstborn, but whatever happened there, then the Pharaoh and his army were thinking, well, we'll be strategic, we'll let them go and get them out into the open where they'll be more vulnerable, and then we can pursue them and chase them there and strike them down in the open vulnerable, which of course now is making me think of the movement, where I'm going, the movement in Gaza from place A to place B, and then they constantly end up in places where it's easier to track them down and bomb them. What a sad world. Really, what a truly tragic world.
I still don't understand the part about that. Then they'll know how powerful God is. I don't know.
Because he's saying, and when they see, it'll be a short thing because they'll all be wiped out, right? But when they see God then save the Hebrews again, they'll realize how their God is stronger. But they're all going to be wiped out. So it's going to be a short realization. But I guess presumably children of children and children will tell the story, or our children will tell the story, and it'll get to their children.
Assuming some will.
None of the chariots that they're trying to cross live, but not all the Egyptians go. So, other questions, reflections? No? Okay. You keep reading, Rebecca?
Sure. When the
Thank
king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his courtiers had a change of heart about the people and said, "What is this we have done, releasing Israel from our service?" He ordered his chariot and took his force with him. He took 600 of his picked chariots and the rest of the chariots of Egypt, with officers in all of them. Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh stiffened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he gave chase to the Israelites, as the Israelites were departing defiantly. The Egyptians gave chase to them, and all the chariot horses of Pharaoh, his riders, and his warriors overtook them in camp by the sea near Pi-Hahirah before Baal-Zephon. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites caught sight of the Egyptians advancing upon them. Greatly frightened, the Israelites cried out to Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, and they said to Moses, "Was it for want of graves in Egypt that you brought us to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, taking us out of Egypt? Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt, saying, 'Let us be, and we will serve the Egyptians'? For it is better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." But Moses said to the people, "Have no fear. Stand by and witness the deliverance which Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh will battle for you. You hold your peace." Then Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh said to Moses, "Why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward. And
Jump
you..."
in here for a minute. I'm gonna jump in here for a minute. So there's an interesting show. Shia Held does an interesting engagement or interpretation or exploration of this. So the Israelites are complaining, "I'd rather die in Egypt than in the wilderness, or at least live in Egypt than die in the wilderness." And Moses says to them, "Just have faith. God will save you." And God then says to Moses, "Why are you telling them that? Why are you saying this?" And what Shia Held does with this is he says that what God is, because why is God angry at Moses? Like he's doing the best he can here, right? He's got a whole bunch of people enraged at him. And what Shia Held says is that God is angry at Moses because in order for people to become liberated, they have to take into their own hands their liberation. And they're turning to, right, they're like, "Let me go back to Moses. Let me go back to Egypt where I'll at least have the Pharaoh ruling over me and I'll be safe." And Moses is saying, "No, just turn to a different type of leader, Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, and that leader will take care of you." And what God is saying instead is, no, tell the people to move forward. Tell them to have the courage to take the next step. And so here, what God is saying to Moses is, remind the people that they have to take responsibility for their liberation and they have to take the next step. Now, you could think that maybe they had a little bit of decision overload, right? Maybe they were a little bit like overloaded by taking all the decisions and made all the steps that they took up to that moment. And, maybe it'd be nice to God to just cut them some slack and give them some grace. But God's talking to Moses here, not to all the people. And so that's how Shia Held understands that weird contrast that's going on there when the people are all upset and Moses is saying, "Just be passive." And God's saying, "No, they can't just be passive. They need to take action for their lives and for their liberation," which I think is a really interesting interpretation that I enjoy, And one second, and constantly throughout the story, right, they're having to actually take steps. And we'll see when they get to the Sea of Reeds. Riley, you can try. It's really loud, so I'm not sure if we're going to be able to hear you well.
Okay, I'll just try to say two things relatively quietly. One is, I agree with you. I think there's a certain amount of trusting God, but row your boat to shore, right? Kind of attitude in that too, of like, you need to take the steps in order for this to work. You have to act to save yourself. But the other thing I'm really wondering about too is, you're saying it's Yud-Heh-Vah-Heh doing this, but in some ways we're not seeing the enlightened form of God in creating, who is jealous and is strengthening Pharaoh, are we? And so I'm just wondering about that as well.
We're not. It was hard to hear you, Riley. So I didn't catch the question. Was we're not seeing what? Try it one more time. But there's background noise, so it's hard.
Okay. The enlightened form, we're not really seeing the enlightened form of God, right? Because he's strengthening Pharaoh, and it's from jealousy, it sounds like, predominantly. So I was just wondering what you thought of that.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Right here, we're seeing God consciousness still kind of in its evolutionary limited stage of the voice of domination, not the voice of love. And so there's these two, this is just another manifestation of these two worldviews that we see in the Torah. And they even manifest within the divine. And here, the divine is like, I'm going to show how great and strong I am. And we could say that's the voice of the people that wrote that part of the Torah that's still living in the concept of domination and power over, which is understandable. But yeah, it's a limited manifestation of what we might wish for divine entity. Neil, you're muted.
I loved what you said earlier about it being not just the outer circumstances change, but the consciousness and the agency of the Israeli people. So, for instance, the first act was have the courage to put the blood of the lamb on your doorpost and basically identify yourself not just as a puppet on a string, but somebody who has collective consciousness and willing to take steps. The bookend to that is the sea did not split until two ordinary people not just went into the water, but went all the way up to their nostrils, which a lot with some thinkers that are more sophisticated than I was saying, concluded if you're dealing with a society, just taking, quote, reformist incremental measures is not going to make any real change. It requires making a commitment from with every muscle in your being, and that you're not going to see changes right away, but that's the only thing that will ensure any type of deep level change rather than just a few concessions here and there.
Right. Thank you, Neil. Beautiful. Anyone else here? Any reflections or questions? No? Okay. Great. Let's keep going.
Okay.
Thank
Then
you, Rebecca.
Yud-Heh-Vah-Heh said to Moses, why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward. And you lift up your rod and hold out your arm over the sea and split it, so that the Israelites may march into the sea on dry ground. And I will stiffen the hearts of the Egyptians so that they go in after them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his warriors, his chariots and his riders. Let the Egyptians know that I am Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots and his riders. The messenger of God, who had been going ahead of the Israelite army, now moved and followed behind them. And the pillar of cloud shifted from in front of them and took up a place behind them. And it came between the army of the Egyptians and the army of Israel. Thus there was the cloud with the darkness, and it cast a spell upon the night, so that the one could not come near the others, and all through the night. Then Moses held out his arm over the sea, and Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh drove back the sea with a strong east wind all that night, and turned the sea into dry ground. The waters were split, and the Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. The Egyptian.
I'm going to jump in here to explain, because Neil mentioned something that's not in here, and so you might all be wondering, what's he talking about here? So there's midrash, stories, interpretations about what's going on here. And there's these two conflicting stories. On one story, one of the rabbis says, all the tribes were so excited that they were fighting amongst each other who would go in first to the sea. And And so they're having this big fight, and then one of the tribes goes in. And then there's this other story, the rabbi says, that no, these were people who were too scared and they didn't want to take a leap of faith. And it was Nachshon. And Nachshon decided to walk into the water. So it actually hadn't split yet. And he walked in, and he kept going and going and going. It wasn't until it got up to his nose that the water split. And so the way that story is interpreted, as Neil touched upon, is, it took such an incredible leap of faith that Nachshon just kept walking and walking and walking and walking until the water got up to nose, and then the sea split. And then other folks then had the courage. And so I kind of think both of those stories are interesting, because on one hand, the people are so excited and probably terrified also, that they all jump in together. And on the other hand, sometimes it does take somebody being willing to take that first step, or a group of people maybe, to take that first step into the treacherous unknown and have faith that the waters would split and that they would be safe. So those are the conflicting stories, and that's what Neil was referring to when he was mentioning that. Andre.
There was just a throwaway reference to the army of Israel. Was that just some kind of a description, or is it considered at this point, or has it always been considered to be an army?
I was wondering if someone was going to pick up on that. Yeah, it's an interesting question. It mentioned earlier that they armed themselves, or they took something like that. And the commentators go back and forth on what's going on there. But they went and got things from the Egyptians, right? So the question is, did they actually get arms? There's nothing that says they actually got weapons. There's no indication that there were actual weapons. But I think that when they talk about army of Israel, you have to look at the terminology. They're really just talking about the nation, the people, the collective.
Okay.
Which is not obvious. It's kind of like interesting, right? If you think about it, it's kind of like the army of Israel today versus the army of Hamas today, right? Like the mechanizations and might and weaponry and sophistications are not comparable at all. Any other questions?
What was the Hebrew for the word?
Oh yeah, I'm not sure.
It's not a military language.
It might be
Assembly of.
Yeah, I think it's assembly. That's what I think. Yeah. Okay, Kamal. I don't have.
Okay.
Oh,
Oh, sorry. Hi. Yeah, the word army is just, I don't know if that's appropriate, but anyway, I see the building of the consciousness of the relationship between the divine and us that must be witnessed, because we have ears and eyes and we are forward-looking peoples. So that's what I wanted to say. And it requires the being, the presence of and of course the survival and jumping into the water, making that expression that I, through the divine, I want to survive so that I can do what we are here to do, is to record and to pass on. So that's what I wanted to say.
Nice. Thank you. Anyone else have any questions or thoughts?
It says the camp.
Yeah, I think they translate.
Machane is the word.
Yeah,
Machane means camp.
Camp, yeah.
Swa is an army.
Yeah, so it's not, the word actually, the translation actually doesn't match the Hebrew, Andre. It's Machane, which is the camp of Israel. So you have to look at the Hebrew to really know. Thank you, Andre, for finding that so quickly. Okay. We can continue.
okay. The Egyptians came in pursuit after them into the sea, all of the Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and riders, At the morning watch, Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh looked down upon the Egyptian army from a pillar of fire and cloud and threw the Egyptian army into panic. God locked the wheels of their chariots so that they moved forward with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the Israelites, for Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh is fighting for them against Egypt." Then Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh said to Moses, "Hold out your arm over the sea, that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians and upon their chariots and upon their riders." Moses held out his arm over the sea, and at daybreak the sea returned to its normal state, and the Egyptians fled at its approach. But Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh hurled the Egyptians into the sea. The waters turned back and covered the chariots and the riders, Pharaoh's entire army that followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained. But the Israelites had marched through the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. That thus Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh delivered Israel that day from the Egyptians. Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the shore of the sea. And when Israel saw the wondrous power which Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh had wielded against the Egyptians, the people feared Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh. They had faith in Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh and in God's servant Moses.
The word for camp, machaneh, talks about the encampment of Israel and the encampment of Egypt. But when they talk about the Egyptian army chasing them, they use other words like chayil, which means soldier, and rechev, which means chariot. So all it camp when it refers to it's a mistranslation, frankly.
Yeah. You can continue.
Okay, then Moses said the Israelites sang this song to Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh. They said, "I will sing to Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh is my strength and might. He is become my deliverance. This is my God, and I will enshrine him, the God of my father's house, and I will exalt him. Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, the warrior Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has cast into the sea, and the pick of his officers are drowned in the sea of reeds. The deeps covered them. They went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, glorious in power." Your right hand shatters the foe. In your great triumph, you break your opponents. You send forth your fury. It consumes them like straw. At the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. The floods stood straight like a wall. The deeps froze in the heart of the sea. The foe said, "I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My desire shall have its fill of them. I will bear my sword. My hand shall subdue them. You made your wind blow. The sea covered them. They sank like lead in the majestic waters. Who is like you, Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, among the celestials? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in splendor, working wonders? You put out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. In your love, you lead the people, you redeemed. In your strength, you guide them to your holy abode. The people hear them tremble. Agony grips the dwellers in Philistia. Now are the clans of Edom dismayed. The tribes of Moab, trembling grips them. All the dwellers in Canaan are aghast. Terror and dread descend upon them. Through the might of your arm, they are still as stone. Till your people cross over, Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, till your people cross whom you have ransomed, you will bring them and plant them in your own mountain, the place you made to dwell in, Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, the sanctuary, O my Lord, which your hands establish. Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh will reign forever and ever. For the horses of Pharaoh with his chariots and riders went into the sea, and Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh turned back on them the waters of the sea. But the Israelites marched on dry ground in the midst of the sea. Then Miriam, the prophet, Aaron's sister, picked up a
Well, I
hand.
won't say anything to jinx anybody, but thank you very much for doing what you're doing.
Then Miriam, the prophet, Aaron's sister, picked up a hand drum, and all the women went out after her and danced with hand drums. And Miriam chanted for them, sing to Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, for he has triumphed gloriously, horse and driver, he has hurled into the sea. Then Moses.
I'm gonna jump in here for a moment. So that whole song, you know, when I talk about the fact that we're going to chant Pihuli instead of Mi Chamocha, this is where Mi Chamocha comes from. This whole song. Mi Chamocha ba'elim Adonai, Mi Chamocha neder b'kodesh nora tehila osef eleh. It's the chant that we normally sing after, before we go into the silent Amidah. And the reason we don't chant it is because now you've heard the whole thing, right? It's a song of violent triumph of an army, right? Of a god violently killing. It's a very violent song. And while you know, I can have compassion and understanding for the Israelites celebrating and cheering, it's not something we want to uplift. There's a midrash that says that as Miriam and as all the Israelites were chanting, the angels started chanting also in celebration. And God gets infuriated with the angels and says, are these not my people also? Are these not my children also? Talking about the Egyptians. And so this is one of the times, I say this a lot, that the divine is not only with the oppressed. I talked about this last week in my drash, in my little musings on Parsha Bo, when God says, Bo, come to Pharaoh. And this question arises, like, why is it saying come to Pharaoh? Is God with Pharaoh? And so I say that God is with both the oppressed and the oppressor. Because God's everywhere. And even if Pharaoh's heart and the Egyptians' hearts are so closed that they can't access the divine, still the divine, even though the divine played it, you know, through this story, played a rather large role in wiping out all the Egyptians, and yet still the divine is sad at the loss of human life. And I would say all life, animal life too. So that's why. So when I say we're not going to chant Mi Chamocha, now you know why, because it's this big war celebration chant of the slaughter of Egyptians, which I don't really want to uplift.
Yeah. You say something about in the Passover celebration, the fast of the firstborn.
Uh-huh.
Can you say something about it?
Oh, when we fast for the firstborn. Yeah, so we fast, I think, my memory is not so great on this, but I think we fast for there's often times when you fast for the firstborn. So in this parsha, in the end of last week's parsha, there's it says in the Torah that because of the slaughter of the firstborn, every firstborn Hebrew, every firstborn Israelite Jew is essentially sacrificed to the divine. And there's this act that happens in Orthodox homes where they literally like make a change of money to keep the child, but you're basically giving the child. And so there's this uplifting of the firstborn because of the slaughter of the firstborn. Yeah, so they tie it to that. Yeah. Other questions or thoughts? Yeah, there's cups and water on the table if folks are thirsty. No? No one has any questions or thoughts? No?
Just, I guess, I see it in the story and take inspiration as we deal with what's happening today, you know, with all of the destruction and you know that's happening with you know who. I don't even want.
And this gives you inspiration?
Yeah, that you do have to take those first steps. You know, you have to have faith. You know, even as forces come down on you and pursue you and destroy, you know, your life or try to destroy you, that you have to take. Somebody has to step up and into the waters.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you, Abby. Yeah, I'm just gonna riff on that just a little bit. Yeah, in the story, it says, we didn't read it, but it says that the mixed multitudes went with us, and the Midrash says that many, if not most, of the Hebrews didn't actually leave. But in addition to those that did leave, there was this mixed multitude, others, non-Hebrews, who left with us. And to me, that means people from different locations in the society, socioeconomic, political, probably ethnic, different people left with the Hebrews. And it tells us, I think, kind of what you're touching upon there, which is like, it takes all of us to transform a society. And that's why I like the story of, well, all the tribes went in, as opposed to just one person, because then it's upon all of us, right? Elenu, it's upon all of us to go into those waters, to stand up, and it does take faith, right? We have to have some faith right now that that it's possible, that in the spite of what we're seeing, that transformation and standing up to injustice and horror and all of that were unfolding in this country and in Israel and other places can in fact and will in fact be transformed. Yeah, Austin.
Yeah, so Riley shared in the chat. She's in the cafe. It's really loud, so I'm gonna read it for them. People make mistakes, holding on to their own, thinking they're alone. Honor their mistakes. Everybody makes one another's terrible mistakes. You decide what's right. You decide what's good. Just remember, someone is on your side. Someone else is not. While you're seeing your side, maybe you forgot they're not alone. No one is alone. And that's from No One Is Alone by Stephen Sondheim.
Yeah,
Stephen Sondheim.
Yeah, later on, much later on, when we're at the Mount Sinai, in a few months, that's exactly the same thing. The people say, "Na'aseh v'nishma," we will do, and then we'll listen. In other words, we take the action, and then we contemplate what we're doing, and just spend time talking, versus the other way around, where we spend time and waste time mulling around and arguing and this and that, and then we decide to do. So, one necessarily doesn't come before the other, but it is stated in that way. Some people interpret it to say that we'll follow blindly, we'll do whatever is told for us to do, but I think it's more than that. And the second thing is just the importance of since Abraham, the whole idea of movement forward and journey. And this has been said before, but it's the idea of leaving what is the usual and going to the unknown. It's true for every Bible story that we've read so far. And this is the grand example, is the entire people willing to leave what they had behind, those grumbling, it was better where we were, it's that movement, it's the journey that is the power. It's the movement and not the stasis of staying still. And this is the grandest example of all, is the entire people moving, not just Abraham, not just Jacob and Isaac, but everyone together. And that continues throughout. So just the power of movement and momentum versus the non-power of being static and accepting and blindly following. I think is one of the major themes of the Torah.
Can I jump in for a minute? This is Joyce. Well, building on that, if we look at the Torah commentary as a story of evolution of consciousness, and it's just at this point in time, this is where what Pharaoh Hebrews got is. And also, this is a thought in process. During the service, it occurred to me that I always talk about and promote expanded consciousness, doing what we do spiritually for expanded consciousness, but maybe it's what you were referring to in the service as higher consciousness. And instead of looking at the on a horizontal spectrum, but on a vertical one, that's what we aspire to, so that we are expanding upward. Okay, anyway, that's just that thought process.
I'm thinking of it as spiraling, right? Like we spiral up in integral theory, like you integrate what's prior and you then continue to spiral, but you integrate it. It's not just you leave it behind, but you transform that trauma or that lower consciousness or that, and it becomes integrated into you so that you can transform and become more integrated and whole.
Right.
My concept of movement, if you can hold this in your head, is to have both a y and an x-axis at the same time. You have a spiral y-axis going upwards, and you have a ripple effect x-axis going outwards. And if any of you know what a nigun is, a wordless melody, that's exactly the power of a nigun. It goes upwards and it goes outwards towards the community. So the movement for me is kind of a very difficult concept of upwards and outwards at the same time.
Okay. Thank you. It was beautiful. Thank you, Joycelyn. I am going to just say one thing about the rest of this parsha, because then we're going to wrap up this and move on. So they get to the other side, and then they start complaining again because there's not enough food, and they want the meat, and nothing's quite as good in the desert as it was in Egypt. And so what happens is that Yud-He Vav-He says, okay, I'm going to give you enough manna, bread from the sky. And no matter how much what happens is no matter how much they gather, they get what they need. So if they gather too much, somehow it just becomes less, and it becomes just what they need. If they need less, they need more, they get more. And it's this beautiful teaching of enoughness. And later on in the Torah, God warns them that when you get to your land and you have so much stuff, you're going to think you created it all, and you're going to get haughty and forget about your humble beginnings. And so one of the reasons we every Shabbat and over again, we remind ourselves we were once slaves. It's not only so that we're empathic toward the other, toward the oppressed. It's also so we remember our humble beginnings and we don't become hoardy. We don't hoard. That there's enough. And and there's also going to be meat that comes. And if they gather too much, which they do at first, so that they have some for the next day, so they have to have faith that every day they're going to get enough. Imagine for a moment going to bed and not knowing there's going to be food in your house tomorrow, but just having faith that tomorrow there's going to be food. Now, I say this with a lot of hesitation, perhaps, because of the amount of people in the world who actually do go to bed hungry every night, both by enforced famine and non-human enforced famine. All of it probably is arguably in some ways human enforced. But if they take too much so that they have some for the next day, so they have leftovers, if you will, it gets infested with worms. So this is a beautiful teaching of remembering where you came from and having humility and not taking more than you need. And it ends up becoming kind of an imposed reality, which is really quite beautiful. Okay, I just wanted to touch on that because it's such an important teaching in our Torah, and it was in this parsha, but we'll come back to that. Okay, so we're going to wrap up our Torah study now, and I'm just going to tell you what's going to happen. We're going to wrap up with blessings and Mishaberach and the various things that we do, and then we'll do announcements, and then we'll do Kaddish, and we'll do Kiddush, blessing. And then after that, we're going to take a short break so we can set up here for Tu B'Shvat, and you can take a short break and get what you need. So that's what's happening.
And we're going to announce the raffle winner.
Oh, right. In the announcements, we're going to announce the raffle winner. Thank you.
What raffle?
For completing the survey.
There was a survey.
Whoops.
You can still enter the survey, though, but you just didn't enter the raffle.
Baruch atah ya Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu Baruch atah Shechina notenet haTorah. Amen.
So, Mishaberach, if you have people in need of healing in your life, yourself or others, please just unmute and say their names as we're chanting, and just know, Ami just said it beautifully, that the chanting and the nigun and the la-laing, all of it just lifts up our energy, lifts up our prayers, and lifts up their healing and their names for healing. So we'll start chanting, and just go ahead and say them. You can unmute and say them, you can say them in your home. Either way, it's going to be heard and uplifted.
Mishaberach Avotenu Abraham Yitzchak veYaakov Sarah Rivka Leah Rachel Bilhah v'Zilpa U'yivarech veYirapeh et hacholim. Next paragraph. Mishaberach Imotenu Sarah Rivka Leah Rachel Bilhah v'Zilpa Avraham Yitzchak veYaakov U'yivarech v'yirapeh et hacholim. God, please heal her. El narefana la, El narefana la, El narefana la, El narefana la.
May they be healed in body, mind, and spirit, and return to us fully healed in heart.
Amen.
The planet, the refugees, all who are suffering.
Amen.
PJ Clevenger, Jan Ellman, Steve Ellman, Sandra Miller,
Lori Melroot,
Patty McKay Kelly, everybody I'm not thinking of.
Lekach tov natati lachem Torati al ta'azovu Eitz chaim hi lamachazikim ba v'tomcheha Meusha Neracheha Darcheno V'chol netivoteha Shalom Hashivenu Yudhei Vavhei Ein Lecha V'nashuva Chadesh Yamecha